Любі друзі, доброго дня! Вас вітають Фантастичні Токс, український проект, що говорить про фантастику, її книги, її авторів, її тренди та події, а також попри негоду, попри бомбардування, попри відсутність електрики та будь-які інші незгоди, завжди готовий порадувати вас крутим українським контентом. А сьогодні у нас черговий гість. Цього разу це англо-американський письменник, автор як підліткових, так і дорослих книг Патрік Несс, відомий в Україні за трилогією «Ходячий, хаос» та книгою «Поклик, монстра». So, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Fantastix Talks, Ukrainian science fiction fantasy channel about books, authors, trends, events, and essentially everything that makes it to the literary life of Ukraine. And today we have a guest. We have a guest from United Kingdom, and this is Pàtrick Ness, the author of the Knife of Never Letting Go, The Ask and the Answer, Monster Calls, and many other books. Hello.
Hello. I live in the U.S. now, so you weren't wrong. They're both right. I lived in the UK. Now I live in the U.S., so they're both right.
Okay, because I thought I did really mess it up right at the start of the interview.
Both.
Що ми нині робитимемо? Ми поговоримо про трилогію від видавництва Асса «Ходячий, хаос», перша і друга книги якої ви можете побачити у мене ось тут. І поговоримо також про книгу «Поклик, монстра», яка з'явилася у видавництві «Видавництво». Нагадую, що ви можете дивитися нас на різних платформах. Ви можете дивитися нас на нашому YouTube-каналі, на нашій Facebook-сторінці та також на сторінці Комікон Україна, нашого партнера. Нагадаємо, що саме наш YouTube-канал є основним джерелом всієї годноти. Тож, якщо ви ще не підписалися, саме час туди завітати. У правому верхньому кутку нашого стріму ви можете бачити посилання на QR-код. І за цим посиланням ви зможете знайти, власне, наш канал. Нагадаю, що мене звати Піскозуб Дарія, я українська фантастична і авторка технофентезі «Машина». Незабаром чекайте другу книжечку з друку.
Мене звуть Ірина Грабовська, я теж фантастична. Я авторка українського стімпанку та фентезі, теж незабаром скоро вийде моя книжка. Теж чекайте. Hello, my name is Ірина Грабовська, and I'm a Ukrainian fantasy writer. So I'm very happy to have you here.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for asking me. This is a very special kind of event. Thank you so much.
І ще хотіла нагадати, що сьогодні ми збираємо гроші для госпітальєрів, як завжди на наших ефірах. Так що в чаті буде лінка, не лінка, а номер картки, і ви можете туди надсилати ваші донати, і ми потім відзвітуємо, коли переведемо після ефіру.
Кілька слів про наш формат. Ми спілкуємося двома мовами. Усі наші запитання ми озвучуємо англійською, той час як українських їх переклад ви побачите на екрані. Відповідь свою автор даватиме англійською, і я своєю чергою намагатимуся якомога краще транслювати після цього українською мовою цей переклад. Тож, якщо у вас є запитання, не вагайтесь їх задавати у чаті, як українською, так і англійською. Ми абсолютно все донесемо до автора. So let's start.
Okay.
So, it would be impossible not to start the interview with sort of addressing the elephant in the room. When you open The Knife of Never Letting Go, you see this very loud concept, and I mean it quite literally, so that the world where every man can hear the thoughts of one another, and this is called the noise, and essentially this is the element that impacts the whole world around this. So how did the idea of the book come for you? And I know that it does have something to do with books where dogs can talk.
Well, now, see, it's partly that. I like to say that the Chaos Walking trilogy and the Knife of Never Letting Go started with two big ideas, and one big serious idea and one big stupid idea. Do you want me to keep going, or would you like me to pause so you can try?
You can go on. That's okay.
Because I'm going to go on forever. So just tell me when you want me to stop.
That's okay. You can go on.
So the big serious idea was this feeling of information overload. Because, you know, as the world got through the 90s and the internet really moved into our lives, and mobile phones did the same, and then social media became such an integral part of who we are and how we communicate, I thought the amount of information that we're getting is so vastly increasing that it often feels noisy. And, you know, you can't escape it. You know, you have to listen to people shouting. You have to listen to their opinions, whether you want to or not. And so to me, the logical question is, what if there was no choice? What if you had to listen? And worse, what if you were young and you had to listen and had to share? Because that's what it kind of feels like at the moment. You have to share yourself. And what effect would that have on privacy, on personal growth, on growing up, on becoming a man or a woman? You know, we can't put the genie back in the bottle. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying we should ask the question, how is it affecting us and how is it changing us? And what do we need to do to keep our humanity within it? So translate that and then I'll tell you the stupid one. So.
Отже, ідея до трилогії «Ходячий, хаос», яка представлена українською у перших двох книгах «Ніж якого не відпустиш» та «Запитання та відповідь», з'явилася із двох ідей. Однієї великої і серйозної, і одної великої, але дурної. Отже, серйозна полягала у тому, що я задумувався про інформаційне перезавантаження, яке ми відчуваємо на сьогоднішній. Серйозна полягала у тому, що я задумувався про інформаційне перезавантаження. Might have there it is. Отже, в 90-х роках з'явилася величезна кількість інформації, яка з усіх боків нас оточувала. Це як мобілки, так і інтернет, соцмережі, постійний зв'язок. Інформації ставало все більше, і шуму навколо нас, відповідно, ставало все більше. Від нього аж ніяк не можна було втекти. І я задумався, а що як у тебе може не бути вибору втекти від цього перегрузу, у цього шуму. А що більше того, якщо ти молодий, юний на цей момент і не просто змушений слухати це все, а ще й змушений ділитися усім. Як вплине на твій ріст, на твоє формування як особистості, якщо абсолютно все про тебе чутно і відомо всім? Ми не можемо просто одного дня відходити все назад і не чути все, і забути все, що ми почули. Як зберегти себе в епоху цифрового перегрузу? Ось що, власне, стало в ядрі моєї книги.
Okay, so that's the first big serious idea. And the other big idea is a big stupid idea. And that idea is that I never, ever liked books about talking dogs. Because I never thought that they talked how dogs would actually talk. Talking dogs in books and movies tend to talk like little human beings. And to me, that's not at all how your dog would talk to you. Because dogs are not humans, they're dogs, and that's why we love them. And I think if a dog could talk, a dog would only ever talk about food, sex, and going to the bathroom. Because those are the things that concern a dog. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Because the other thing that they would talk about is how much they love you. And that's the great thing about a dog. And so I wanted to have a dog that talked, but talked like an actual dog would talk. So Knife of Never Letting Go has Menchie, who talks about going to the bathroom and talks about food, but is, you know, he's a little character. He's just allowed to be a dog instead of a little human being. And that makes me laugh, and it makes me just love him. So one big serious idea, one big stupid idea, and somehow there's 1,700 pages of a trilogy. So
yeah. He's my favorite character. Mind you. Yeah.
Отже, якась була друга велика дурна ідея, з якої почалася трилогія. Ідея була така, що я страшенно не люблю книги, у яких говорять собаки. Чому? Тому що у всіх них здебільшого собаки, коли отримують здатність говорити, чомусь починають говорити, немов маленькі люди. Вони резонують, говорять, мов би то справжня людина, і зовсім не видається, що це є тварина. Мені хотілося написати книгу, де собака зможе говорити, однак коли вона говоритиме, вона звучатиме, власне, як собака, а не як людина. І я собі прикинув, що якби собака могла говорити, вона б здебільшого говорила про їжу, секс і туалет. І це не є погано, абсолютно не є погано, це є просто відображення того, що це собаки, а не люди. Більше того, собака говорила про те, як сильно вона любить свого господаря, який у неї неймовірний зв'язок із ним. І саме так з'явився Манчі, собака головного персонажа книги Тода Г'юїта. Манчі говорить, власне, про те, що його турбує, що він би хотів сходити в туалет, що він би хотів би поїсти, ну і будь-які супровідні думки. Власне, я хотів дозволити йому бути маленьким песиком, а не маленькою людиною. І так, опля, і написав 1700 сторінок трилогії.
Well, we enter this world through Todd Hewitt, the boy who is not yet a man and desperately wants to become one by listening to the noise, the things one world not here in our world. Is that why you made Todd a young adult? How did you find the voice of a boy who's still shaping its worldview?
Well, Todd is, in the book I made him 13, although there is a question of what that actually means when you're on another planet, because that's part of the question. Because I think the stories tend to take place, most stories tend to take place in English, the word is liminal, a liminal space, which is the space where something changes. You know, and it comes from an oceanic term where salt water meets fresh water, and where they meet is a liminal space. And that's where I think most stories come from. It's when something is changing into something else. And to me, I think it's a false idea that there is some dividing line where suddenly you were a boy before, but you're a man after, is something I wanted to question and ask about. So we see Todd wanting to become a man in the way that his town has told him he's going to become. And then that comes under very, very strenuous questioning by what he learns and by when he meets Viola, the other main character, and then even his age, because he's been told that he's 13 and she says, yes, but the years here are longer. So are you even 13 in the way that I think of 13, you know? And so that's really what I wanted. I wanted this idea that there is no dividing line between childhood and adulthood. It is a long space that you have to travel through. And Todd needs to learn that to actually become the man he's supposed to be. And so that's what really interested me, to take apart this idea that one day you become an adult, and that what becoming an adult means one thing in particular, because the men in his town think it means one thing in particular, and he learns that no, it doesn't. There's all kinds of men. There's all kinds of ways to behave, and you can choose who you are. So that's my choice for Todd.
Головному персонажу книги Тоду Г'юїту на момент написання книги, на початок написання книги є 13 років. Але, зрештою, що ж це може означати, якщо ми знаходимося на іншій планеті? У англійській мові є слово, яке можна схарактеризувати як лімінал. Це місце, де солона вода з'єднується із свіжою, змішуючись, утворюючи щось абсолютно нове. І зрештою, саме так я уявляв собі по-справжньому дорослість, коли немає чіткого моменту, коли просто оп, і людина стає дорослою. Тот бажає стати дорослим за дуже конкретною моделлю. Це є модель, яка побутує у його місті, у його середовищі, у поселенні на планеті, де він живе. І це дуже конкретне означення, як бути чоловіком. Дуже один тип того, як бути чоловіком, як формуватися, ким стати. Після того Тот зустрічає Віолу, це друга протагоністка книги. І вона пояснює йому, що тобі 13, але що це означає? На цій планеті роки довші, тож можливо, по правді тобі не було би 13, тобі було би значно більше. Я хотів дослідити ту думку про те, що одного дня ти станеш дорослим. Але нема такого, як один день, більше того, немає одного відображення буття дорослості, що бути дорослим можна зовсім по-різному формуючи свої вчинки, по-різному відображаючи своє життя і, зрештою, по-різному розвиваючись. So we've mentioned Viola, and there is a very stark contrast that we see when she appears on the stage. So at the point where she meets, where Todd sees her, she understands that he can't hear her thoughts. And this creates this almost dichotomy, as if it was Margaret Atwood's book, with men and women separated, with sexes so polarized. And that metaphor goes on from the first book to the second and on, because the third one is not yet translated in Ukrainian, so I don't know how it ends. But it feels almost like, well, maybe a metaphor of two sexes learning to understand each other, or maybe even using the two sexes as a metaphor for something bigger, for internal fear of the different. So for you, when you created this difference between men and women, what was this about?
Well, genuinely, I don't think that you can ever say that men are one thing and women are another. I genuinely don't think that. I think there's no accurate sentence that begins with those words, because I think we're all far more complicated than that. So I'm definitely not trying to say anything about that men are one way and women are another, because that's just not true. What I was interested in is exactly what you said, which is that I think the thing we do worst as a species is how we treat difference. That something that is different must be either worse than us, so we can step on it and exploit it, or it's better than us, so we have to bring it down, and attack it. So there's so little idea in our humanity that something different is just different. And so I thought, well, what if I took an easy seeming apparent difference, men and women, and made it as extreme as possible, that you could hear all men's thoughts, but you couldn't hear women's thoughts. And that might just be a simple question of biology. And I wanted to explore, how would we react? How would we treat that? And so we start with the very worst, but then we see that other people have handled it in a different way, and that there is a way to handle a difference that extreme. So that's really what it was. It was to try to just examine how we do so badly with the question of difference. It genuinely, I wasn't trying to say that men are this and women are that. Because you can't even, because I get asked a lot, what about a transgender person on the planet? And I think, you caught me. I didn't think about that when I wrote the book. It was 10 years ago. I hope that I'm a smarter, better person now. But it, made me think, and I have to think, okay, what does that mean? What would that mean? So that, I don't know. I'm always learning about that stuff, hopefully I keep learning through the rest of my life about it, about difference. But for this book, it was really trying to say any kind of difference. How do we treat it? And we've done so badly in the past. Can we do better in the future?
Я абсолютно не вірю, що жінки – це щось одне, чоловіки – щось інше. Цю фразу підставте будь-що зрештою, бо що я маю на увазі, це те, що не вірю, що можна конкретно поділити усіх на чоловіків і жінок як означну першу чергову рису. Тому що насправді усі ми набагато складніші. І, власне, ви дуже чітко підмітили те, що тут у цьому романі різниця між чоловіками і жінками – це радше є метафорою того, як ми, як людство, ставимося до інакшості. Адже, зрештою, у нас, як людство, є неймовірно огидне ставлення до того, що є відмінне від нас. Якщо це є щось гірше, отже, його треба знищити. Якщо щось краще, необхідно, треба його підкорити і панувати над цим. І, зрештою, я зрозумів, що ми можемо це дослідити навіть на такому простому прикладі, як чоловіки і жінки. Візьмемо їх, невелика біологічна різниця між ними двома, один і той самий вид, просто два його представники. І я почав із простого твердження. А що як на моїй планеті усі чоловіки можуть чути думки один одного, а усі жінки не зможуть? І зрештою, які причини, які наслідки це приведе за собою. Яким чином ця різниця перетвориться, зміниться і розкриється? Як ми дізнаємося у романі, що для деяких людей ця різниця стала абсолютно неможливою до життя, до співжиття. Деякі змогли знайти метод, як використати це, а для інших це абсолютно зовсім не було проблемою. Мене дуже часто запитують, насправді, що я мав на увазі, коли говорив про чоловіків і жінок, але це абсолютно не про чоловіків і жінок. Також мене часто запитують, а як же трансгендери? А що ж трапилося ви на моїй планеті, якби там був трансгендером? Мушу сказати, що на той момент, а це було більше 10 років тому, я не задумувався про цього. Я сподіваюся, що на цей момент я став розумніше і задумався би про такий випадок у моєму вигаданому світі. Але зрештою, такий самий конфлікт може стосуватися будь-якої різниці у персонажах. Нехай це чоловіки і жінки, нехай абсолютно будь-який інший зразок.
My God, my answers are long. I'll try to make it shorter. So.
That is not even close to the longest that I've had. I mean, I've had like an author who's like page 1, 2, 3, 4. And it starts like, like heartfelt pauses, and then it moves on to mentioning different areas of the brain. And I'm like, okay, I don't know that, but I'm trying to do this on. Любі друзі, у нас якась невеличка трабла. Десь зникли мої колеги.
Yay.
Hey.
This seems to be actually an internal problem of StreamYard, because it wasn't something with internet. It just threw us all out of here.
All of us, yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. I'm most concerned about your safety. So.
No, that's okay. It was really nothing. There was no scary sound at the beginning, so.
Okay. All right. We're good. Carry on.
Okay, so let's continue.
Yeah. Well, everyone is talking about Munchie in the chat, so I can't help but ask about Munchie. I feel he is fully fleshed a secondary character. Did he, by any chance, had a prototype? And wasn't it too sad writing that final Munchie scene?
He didn't have an exact prototype, except that I have cats, and I love giving little funny voices to my cats, where my cats just don't care about human concerns at all. They're not, they're like when I was writing this book, I had a little black cat called Dietrich, and Dietrich would never have said much if he could speak, but he loved pork. So whenever I'd make a pork chop, he'd be like pork, 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 pork. That makes me laugh. That makes me laugh. That it's not, he doesn't care about conversation. He just cares about pork. And so that's the kind of prototype I would do voices for my cats. As for the sadness, absolutely. It's a real writing philosophy of mine that if I'm not feeling it while I write it, I can't ask a reader to feel it while they read it. So if I'm not feeling that upset or that much grief, then I'm doing it wrong, and I need to work at it to make it better so that a reader feels it. So absolutely, yes, absolutely, I feel sad. Very, very sad. It's the saddest thing I've ever written. But he went protecting Todd, who he loves more than anything in the world. So, which is what any dog would want. But still, it's very, very sad.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking for me, because I just finished your book before the interview, and it was just absolutely heartbreaking.
I get lots of people who act as if I've killed a real dog.
Yeah.
No, never harmed a dog. So, not in real life. No. Also, I have to say, that if you were that upset about it, that is also a credit to the translator whose name I don't have here. So I really want to credit them, that if you're feeling it, then that is much credit to the translator.
Yeah, the translator was Остап Українець, and the translation, to my mind, it was incredible because it was too hard to translate.
Yeah. So huge thank you. Big thank you to the translator.
And also, an interesting thing that you've mentioned that, like sadness is my philosophy. If something saddens me, then all is good. And I thought, this is a very Ukrainian feature. Like you might have some very deep in your blood Ukrainian blood, because that feels like, same thing as us. Like, well, the history is hard. It's so sad, but it's so right when it's so sad. So you might have some Ukrainian blood after all.
Yeah.
And also, your translator name is Остап Українець, as his surname literally translates as Ukrainian. So you can call it Ostap Ukrainian. So that is one more point in which this all fits together in this giant maze.
That's like being called Johnny American. So.
That's the same thing. So to translation now. У Манчі не було прототипа. Разом з тим, у мене є кіт, і я люблю часом смішно озвучувати, коли він щось робить. На момент написання книги у мене був котик, чорненький котик, якого звали Дітрик, який страшенно любив свинину. І коли я давав йому свинину, мій кіт абсолютно ніяким чином не показував, що його турбує оце жалюгідне людське існування, що йому необхідно щось від мене. Але разом з тим, я смішно озвучував, коли він бачив свинину, порк. І зрештою, щодо суму, якщо б не було сумно, то воно не було правдиво. Я намагаюся таким чином точити моє мистецтво, аби можна було відчути цей сум, аби ти міг пройнятися емоціями, аби ти міг, зрештою, зрозуміти, що це по правді так трапилось. Багато людей говорять мені, що їх так сильно вразила смерть Манчі, мовляв, я зачепив справжню собаку. Однак тут я повинен признатися, ніякого собаку ніколи я не чіпав. Ну і зрештою, якщо вам насправді було дуже пекельно боляче, от як нашій чарівній Ірині Грабовській, від долі Манчі, без спойлерів тут так намагаюся сказати, то це велика заслуга перекладача українського, Остапа Українця. Тож дякую, Остапе, за твій чудовий переклад.
It was so funny to hear you say pork. So.
That is not even the funniest. I mean, there was one author who was speaking about underwater stuff. It was Peter Watts, and he started talking about made the sound of when he's underwater and the water got into his throat, like.
Yeah.
And that had actually like the plot in itself, because you couldn't translate that, so I made my best and started goggling on the screen.
Translation is an art.
Yeah, indeed it is. So moving on, and I want to speak about my favorite man in the trilogy, and not in the way that you could say about a person, but in a character. I think it's safe to say, and of course I'm talking about Mayor Prentice, who later becomes President Prentice. And that, oh boy, is he an interesting one, because I do love good antagonists, but when a good antagonist makes you revisit certain things that you think about the world, Mayor Prentice does something more. On one occasion, he seems like almost not a person, by an epitome of manipulation, fears, and doubts that a person can have. And there are others, smaller moments, where he seems like a very scared man himself, so scared that is sort of shaped him as he is. And that role really opens up even more in the Ask and the Answer, where he shows his reign of terror. So what was this character for you personally? Was this sort of classical fantasy evil, which is almost like the epitome of everything evil, or was he, after all, somewhere a very flawed person who has interpreted the noise in a very wrong way?
Well, I think that pure evil is only of limited interest as a character. It can work for a short while. The character of oh my God, I'm forgetting my own character's name. The priest, Aaron, one. He's pretty pure evil, but he's only interesting for a while because they don't change. They're not surprising. So part of it was purely, I don't think pure evil is an effective villain, because it is a way to, this is what it is for me, really genuinely what it is, which is I always worry when let's use Hitler as an example. I worry when we say that Hitler was just a monster, because if we call him just a monster, then that lets us think we could never do what Hitler did. If you see what I mean, it lets us off the hook. Because we say, well, that's fine. He was a monster. So I, as a human, don't have to reflect on my capability for evil. So Hitler was a monstrous man. And to me, that's an important distinction. Because if he's a monstrous man, then any other man could do what Hitler did and could become Hitler. So therefore, we must always, always be vigilant about monstrous men. Always. Because they could be any of us. You know, it's a reflection of us. Not that I don't, of course Hitler was a monster. Of course he was. I'm not saying he's not. But I think he was a monstrous man. And that implies that any of us are capable of being monsters. And that's the thing I think we need to remember, because otherwise we get in huge trouble. So I wanted a villain who did not think he was a villain. He thinks that he's doing the right thing. And he has a backstory. It's clear eventually why he's doing what he's doing, why he thinks it's right. He is clearly not right, but he thinks he is. And to me, that is much more terrifying. The friendly, charismatic villain who just can't be reasoned with because he thinks he's right. That is terrifying. And it's constantly terrifying because it's not evil as we like to stereotype evil. It's a different kind of evil, one that is human-based, and therefore we have to take responsibility for it, because men like that don't come from nowhere. They get created. And so what is our responsibility for creating a monster? So those are the kinds of questions that were interested in me in Mayor Prentice. I didn't want him to be simple, because simple is easy. And in real life, monstrous men are not easy. You know, they are hard to fight, and therefore much scarier. Careful translating that one. I don't want anybody to think that I said Hitler wasn't a monster. So
I'll try to make it okay. But if there are, I don't know, some weird comments, you can just lay it on me. So don't worry. Отже, чисто зло, ніяким чином не людське, а просто уособлення всього лихого не дуже то цікавить. Воно може утримати твою увагу і твій інтерес на зовсім обмежену кількість часу. От скажімо, як Аарон, це є проповідник із першої книги «Якого не відпустиш». Вони неймовірне зло, чисте, непокрите, отже, власне, вони не змінюються. І саме це, зрештою, змушує нас відпустити інтерес. Ці персонажі не дивують, не змінюються, і це не цікаво. Те, чого я хотів добитися, трішечки інше. Ось візьмемо, до прикладу, Гітлера. Я трошки дивуюся, коли люди кажуть, що він був монстр. Ось, мовляв, тому що він був монстр, цим все і пояснюється. Та якщо ми скажемо, що Гітлер був монстром, ми автоматично не асоціюємо себе з ним. Ми говоримо, що ми ж люди, а він монстр, тому він зробив те, що він зробив. Власне, бо він монстр. Аж навіщо нам аналізувати, що він зробив? Навіщо нам реагувати на це і процесити це, якщо з нами такого може не трапитись? Отут дуже чітко зробити різницю, що він був не жахом, не жахіттям, а жахливою людиною. І всі ми можемо такими стати, у тому сенсі, що ми ніхто не застрахований від такого варіанту, тому повинні бути обережними і розуміти, що зрештою такий персонаж може виявитись серед всіх нас. І я хотів створити негідника що думає, що він не є негідником. Негідника, у якого є власна історія, якою він виправдовує те, що він робить. Такого собі дружнього, харизматичного лиходія, що тероризує тим, власне, як він перемінюється, як він моментально видається то приємним і милим, то жахнючим та неймовірно нелюдським. Власне, такі люди не приходять ні звідки. Вони завжди мають якийсь першопочаток, якийсь корінь у суспільстві. І ми, як люди, повинні нести відповідальність за це. Не лише людина, що це зробила, а й суспільство, що це породило. Well, this feels so very, I don't know, prophetic about what we're living in right now. And we'll get to it. We have an answer. We have a question from your Ukrainian translator. We'll get to that a bit later. But now there is one more book that we have to talk about, and that is A Monster Call. And this book is different because it's written for Siobhan Dodd, who created the idea but was not, unfortunately, able to write it herself. And then you sort of picked up that idea and you wrote it for her. Yeah. And that poses an interesting dilemma. How was it to write this book in comparison to your own? Because you're not only revisiting an idea that someone has created, but there's also an emotional connection between the person that created the idea and you as sort of taking the responsibility, the burden of making this happen not only for yourself, but in turn for that person.
Well, my first response when I was asked to take a look at the idea and see if I would turn it into a book was no, for exactly that reason. I thought I cannot write a tribute or a eulogy because that's not what Siobhan Dodd would have written. She would have written a story. She was a very, very fine writer, and she would have let the story grow and become what it was supposed to be. And so I was going to say no, but I read the materials, and then the magic happened, which is that I got an image, an idea, something felt very powerful, which was the image of Connor coming out of, I didn't know what it would be at that time, but coming out of like a dream or something to discover that he had destroyed his grandmother's living room. And that to me felt so powerful and so transgressive and all about the anger that he can't express and so on. I felt like, oh, that's a book. And so I thought, okay, this is what Siobhan Dodd would have done. She would have let the story grow. And I said to my publishers that I'll do it. I have to have complete freedom, not for an ego reason, but because that's the only way this is any chance of being any good. And so I like to describe it more, I describe it in the note at the beginning as a relay race, that she handed me the idea and I ran with it. And then I handed that to Jim Kay, the illustrator, who brought these amazing illustrations to it. And so it feels like the three of us in that book, starting from this rich, small, but rich idea and letting it grow, which is what I genuinely believe Siobhan Dodd would have done. So, I mean, it's a different book, of course, than what she would have written because I'm a different writer. But I like to think it's like a cake that you can't separate out the ingredients of a cake. We're all in there. You know, you can't separate out the sugar or the egg or, you know, or the flour. That we're all in there mixed together. And it's the three of us that make this book.
Отже, книга «Поклик монстра» написана є за ідеєю однієї авторки, що, на жаль, загинула від раку до того, як могла написати цю книгу. І коли Патріку Нессу запропонували написати книгу за ідеєю покійної авторки, він спершу хотів сказати ні. Чому? Тому що він не міг написати елегію чи трибут цій людині, бо зрештою не цього хотіла би сама Siobhan. Сама Siobhan була хорошою письменницею і, власне, вона би хотіла створити історію. Разом з тим, коли йому дали почитати матеріали, він захопився ними і прийшла до нього картина, де головний герой на ім'я Конор, хлопчик, у якого на останній стадії раку хворіє мама, як він немов би виходить із такого сноподібного стану і розуміє, що він знищив вітальню своєї бабусі, але спочатку він думає, що це був якийсь монстр. І я зрозумів, ось історія. Це історія про втрату і задавлену лють, історію про біль, який людина в собі тамує, і історія, зрештою, яка може бути цікава для нього як письменника. Патрік зв'язався із видавцем і сказав, що я напишу цю книгу, але, будь ласка, дайте мені волю. Тому що, власне, цього би хотіла Шивон. Лише так це зможе перетворитися у повнокровну історію. Опісля того, написавши книгу, я передав її Джиму Кею, ілюстратору, що створив абсолютно неймовірний візуал. І ця книга, по суті, створилася 3 людьми – мною, Шивон та Джимом Кеєм. І від малої ідеї вона переросла до цілої книги, і хотілося б сказати, що так, з одного боку, це не та книга, яку написала би Шивон, адже кожен письменник напише іншу історію, навіть якщо дати йому той самий сюжет. Але мені подобається думати, що це як торт, де ти не можеш розрізнити, де є складники, де борошно, де молоко, де яйця, але всі разом вони творять разом щось круте.
Yeah, and I guess we can like wrapping up with this theme about monster call. A monster call illustrates the approach we love about fantasy and science fiction as a metaphor for reality, with the monster being a manifestation for a boy's pain. In Chaos Walking, we also see the monstrosities that originate the humankind. What interested you in using fantastic elements to look at human nature?
This is a real deep belief of mine. I do not believe that there is any such thing as a realistic novel. I don't think it exists. That even if it looks like reality, even if it looks like right now, our lives right now, it is still fantasy. It is still characters arcing towards their destinies. It's still everything that happens in it must make sense within the universe that's on the page. So I don't think there's such a thing as a realistic novel. I think all novels are fantasy. And I feel like if I can embrace that, and if I can embrace the single law of fiction, which is that whatever happens in the story has to make sense for the universe that you've created, then that's it. That's all you need to do. You need to make a universe where this story could take place. And if that can be any universe, then it can be any story. So that is something that I think that is the most powerful thing about fiction. And it's the most powerful thing about reportedly fantasy fiction, which is it's just these fantastical elements aren't fantasy in that universe. They're realistic there, if you see what I mean. So I don't think there's a separation. And if I can embrace that lack of separation, then I think you can go anywhere. I think you can tell any story. I was once on a panel with an author who I respected, but who tried to imply that because he wrote contemporary realistic fiction and I wrote fantasy, that his novels were somehow richer or more serious. And I said, that is not the difference between a realistic novel and a fantasy novel. That's the difference between a good novel and a bad novel. And there are good novels of both and bad novels of both. So I reject the idea that that fantasy is somehow extra. It is intrinsic to fiction. It is the core element of fiction. And if I can embrace it and say, yeah, then I can do anything, and you can do anything, including ways to describe emotion that you can't otherwise, including ways to talk about politics that you can't otherwise. So I think that is my firm belief about fantasy fiction. That's what I genuinely believe.
Yeah, thanks. That's an important words, I guess.
Since we're both fantasy writers, we really feel that on many levels, because we do feel sometimes this sort of childish overlook of fantasy just because if you take another world, like, it can't be real. But I think it was Ursula Le Guin who said that all fantasy is essentially about reality, just in a different metaphor.
Yeah.
Отже, я не вірю у поняття під назвою реалістична книга. Навіть якщо у вашій оповідці буде наш з вами світ, планета Земля, нехай це буде навіть наша країна, все одно це буде фантастикою. Чому? Тому що ми придумаємо нових персонажів, ми придумаємо нові історії, ми придумаємо абсолютно щось нове навколо них. І зрештою, я неймовірно люблю основний принцип будування історії, що в оповідці оповідка повинна грати за правилами світу, в якому вона знаходиться. І зрештою, що це означає? Що ти можеш створити абсолютно будь-яку історію, яку хочеш, за умови, якщо ти створиш для неї нормальне середовище навколо. Це будь-яка історія, будь-якого напрямку, будь-якого середовища, яка знаходиться абсолютно будь-де. Немає такого поділу на реалістичну та нереалістичну побудову історію. Зрештою, всі абсолютно історії можуть розказувати нам якісь круті штуки. І навіщо насправді цей опис? Якось я був на панелі із автором, якого я насправді дуже поважав, і одного разу цей автор сказав, що розумієш, оскільки у мене книга contemporary, це сучасне письмо, отже, вона насправді краще за оце твоє, фентезі. І я здивувався, бо такого, чорт забирай, не існує. Фентезі не є якимось менш вартісним, фентезі не є менш важливим, чи не є екстра якимось зовнішнім до сторітелингу. Воно абсолютно є ядром всіх оповідок, що ти береш і придумаєш історію з нічого. Яка різниця, придумав чи ти історію, чи цілий світ?
What does привіт mean? It's in the comments a lot.
Привіт, it's hello.
Hi, hello.
Oh, hi. Okay.
So we have actually a couple of questions from your fans. We've sort of tried to wrap our questions around them as well so that we don't lose the time. But some of them are really interesting. And about those that that refer to different things that we haven't spoken about yet, we'll talk about later. But there is a question of, are you now working on some new novel? And if it's not a secret, when it is going to appear?
It's a secret. When is it coming to Ukraine? Is that what the question is?
I guess it would be worldwide, because we understand that it's a very tricky question to ask something like, when is it coming to Ukraine?
Well, then I can actually, the next book is actually, I have the proof, it's called Different for Boys.
Mm-hmm.
And it's short and illustrated.
Wow.
But that comes out in March in America and the US. So that's probably that's my next book. I know that the next book in Ukraine will be book 3 of the trilogy. But otherwise, I tend to keep my work quite private until it's ready, because it needs a private place to change and grow, so yeah. But I'm working.
I can relate to that so hard, because first time my parents saw something I wrote was, and I was actually content enough that it was a good thing to show them, and they had this complete shock that they see their child in one way, and then like a very cheerful and bright person, something like that, and then they open, it's dark, it's painful, and they have this feeling of distancing, like is that what this person could do? Like, I'm very, it's very weird for me. Отже, над чим зараз працює Патрік Несс? Коли вийде наступна його книга, це є секрет. Однак автор показав нам книгу, яка ось вже вийде в Сполучених Штатах та Великій Британії, книжка, яка називається Different for Boys. Українською перекладемо нехай як інше для хлопчиків. Це є коротенька книжка, яка має в собі ілюстрації. Thank you for your help. Наступна книга, яка вийде в Україні, це є 3-я частина трилогії, якого «Ходячий хаос», яка називається «Монстрів із людей». І це, насправді, вперше, як ми почули цю інформацію, Несс нам ще не підтверджувала, тому бачите, саме тому вам потрібно підписатися на канал Фантастичні Токс, тому що лише тут ви отримаєте анонси найпершішими. Я знаю, що такого слова граматично нема, але я, письменниця, можу сказати, що це авторський новотвір. Тому підпишіться, будь ласка, на наш канал і поставте вподобайку цьому стріму. So, the next question is the following. How hard was it to create the noise? For example, how would you come up with the thoughts of one character and another one? And wasn't it hard to write the book in a way that there is something your character will think and will not be able to hide it from others?
Oof, no, I found it easy because I feel like my own brain is very noisy, that it's always racing. There's always a million things going on. And so it really was just kind of trying to write that down and capture that feeling, because, well, I don't know what other people's brains are like, but mine is a busy, crowded, trafficked place. So for me, it was just about trying to accurately portray it. And then, as the question suggests, it becomes a really good plot device. It becomes a way to tell a story, because it's like you don't want to say something, but you are forced to say it. So how does that change your dynamic, and how does that change your relationship? You know, especially you've just met a stranger and you think something rude about them, and out it comes, and you don't want to say it. So how does that change how you react, and how does that change the way that you get through life? So it just became a really interesting set of questions that I think that made the story richer, I hope.
Насправді не було важко придумувати, як звучатимуть думки під час шуму, тому що мій мозок в природі є дуже шумний. Я ловив це відчуття абсолютної переповненості словами, думками, образами. І я не знаю, яким є мозок інших людей, тому можу говорити лише про свій. Та й, по-друге, ось ця повна перезавантаженість шумом і всіх думок з усіх боків, яких ти не можеш приховати, це, власне, і було для мене структурою сюжету, адже ось одного разу ти зустрічаєш людину, і ти хочеш сказати щось одне, видаватися абсолютно однією людиною, а ти не можеш стриматися, і людина дізнається абсолютно всі думки, які ти насправді не хотів, аби вона побачила. І таким чином, насправді, це викликає нові конфлікти, нові проблеми та нові витки у сюжеті. So we've spoken a little bit about the characters, and I'm sorry, Irina, was I invading on your question?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. Your book is very character-driven. How do you find their voice? What is the process of writing?
Honestly, voice is almost a literal experience, in that I just try to get them talking. And that's literally what I do on the page. I will get them talking to another character, or, you know, I'll even if a book isn't narrated, it still has a voice. So I'll try to figure out again, it's literally how they speak. And that's where I find out who they are, what they withhold, how they say it, how they lie, how they tell the truth. So for Todd, I did a lot of work finding out how he spoke. And that I have lots of attempts that didn't work, and that's fine. It's all discovery. And then one day, there it was. And you go, there he is. So I'm going to follow that and see how he turns out. So it's exploration for me, and it's literally getting them to speak and saying that's because how we speak is who we are, really. So that for me, that is the genuine experience of the voice of a character, is make them talk and you'll find out.
Насправді я хотів, аби мої персонажі говорили. Для мене це є, власне, інструмент зрозуміти, хто вони такі. Нехай поговорять один з одним, з кимось іншим, або насправді спробують розповісти мені щось. Так, я дізнаюся, хто вони такі, який їхній характер, які їхні проблеми та як вони збудовані. Істотом було дуже багато роботи. Зрозуміти, як він говоритиме, означало зрозуміти, що він за персонаж. І я виписувався, і ось зрозумів, що ось вона цей момент відкриття, ось ким буде цей персонаж. So,
and there was a question from the translator, right? I didn't want to miss that one.
For the translator, yes, that is actually the next one.
Okay,
so
gotcha.
It's something that I felt as well, because I read the ask and the answer like after the invasion started, and that felt very differently if I were to read the book regardless of these events. You've mentioned yourself that the first book in the Chaos Walking is about fleeing, the second is about tyranny, and the third one is about war.
Yes.
But now that you've witnessing the things that are happening in the world, would you say that they resonate with what you've written in those books?
Oof, I mean, God, I don't know that I can answer that. I mean, all I try to do is truthfully explore what I worry about. I just try to look at it as clearly and truthfully as possible and think, what scares me? And how can I face it? And for example, in the second book, it's not graphic and it's not particularly violent, but there is a scene of torture where the mayor is forcing Viola to answer his questions. And to me, torture is terrifying, truly, truly terrifying, because there's no mercy. And the lack of mercy is so scary. And so they are really just me seeing these things in the world and trying to understand my reaction to them and trying to portray them in a way that does not lie about them to a younger reader and try to get them to feel how I feel about it, to grasp the horror that it isn't just, it's Francois Truffaut, the French film director, said you could never make an anti-war film because portraying war on camera was inherently exciting. And so even if you had an anti-war message, it was going to be pro-war because it makes it seem exciting. And that is the paradox that anyone who writes about tyranny and war has to face. Because you're writing about a dangerous charisma, but it is still charisma. And you're writing about war, which is terrible, but you're writing it in a thriller way. So what do you do? How do you treat it honestly? And I think that a writer can look at horror and choose not to write about it, but I don't think they can choose not to look. I think I have to look, if I'm going to write, and if I'm going to write about this stuff, I have to look at it honestly and face all of the things that scare me and try to record it as accurately as possible. And if I do that, then hopefully there's truth in it. And hopefully that's what resonates in the world. I mean, I don't try to predict. I don't think I'm some soothsayer. I think there have always been tyrants and there are always going to be tyrants. And unfortunately, there's always been war and, we don't seem to learn the lesson. So I feel like it's the best thing I can do is display its cost and say that it is not it's not the exciting action film that you think it is. It's so much worse and it destroys everything. So if it's resonant, if it is, I can't say that it is, but if it is, I hope it's because of that I've tried to tell the truth about it as best I can. So.
Yeah, and something that I felt that is close to what you said is sometimes war is depicted in fantasy as an instrument of showing the clash of something, and that romanticizes things in a sense that you see that as a tool, not a reality, and that makes it so interesting seemingly to write it. And we've had an interview with Rebecca Kwong, and she's of Chinese origin, and she's spoken that she had to write about Chinese-Japanese war in fantasy way, in real way, because it's someone who's sort of historically been through it. She would not, well, that would be honest to herself and her family if she did it, if she did it sort of in this way, and that she probably could not have written it the way it is if she was closer to it, if she was her ancestors who lived during it. And something that it is true in what you said is, I think after you've really seen it, is you might not even have that chance, that ignorant bliss of not seeing it and thus not fighting it. So that's very complicated and one-way ticket.
My father is a Vietnam veteran, and the toll of war on my father is apparent. You can see it. He's a very strong man, but you can see it. And so I couldn't ever choose to believe that war is purely heroic, because it's not. I've seen its effects on my own father. So yeah, I'm just agreeing, basically.
Отже, коли я писав «Ходячий хаос», я хотів дістатися тих речей, які мене самі турбують, які мене лякають, яких я намагаюся зрозуміти. У другій книзі є елемент, є сцена, яка мене страшенно жахала як людину. І це є сцена, коли мер Прентіс тортурами дістає із Віоли інформацію. Для мене сама думка про тортури неймовірно болюча, тому що у ній немає ніякого милосердя, і відсутність милосердя просто жахає мене. Я хотів глянути реалістично на теми, які мене турбували, але при цьому дати змогу дітям та підліткам та дорослим зрозуміти, що я мав на увазі. Французький режисер Труфо сказав, що не можна зробити антивоєнний фільм, тому що як ти тільки показуєш війну, це стає агіткою війни. Тому що ти не просто оповідаєш про жахіття, ти насправді показуєш таку небезпечну харизму зробити це чесно, бо інакше, якщо покажеш правдиво, то це відверне, це буде жахати, і це насправді не буде цікаво. Письменник, на мою думку, може обрати не писати жахи тих тем, яких він торкається, але він не має права не дивитись на них. Якщо я пишу певні жахливі теми, то я намагаюся розкопати їх вартість тих великих, болісних дій, які роблять персонажі, як вони впливають на них, на інших, як вони нищать. І якщо вам зрезонували ці події, то я радий, що мені це вдалося. Сам мій батько є ветераном В'єтнамської війни, і я сам можу бачити, як це впливає на нього. Він є сильний чоловік, однак разом з тим війна залишила на ньому свій слід. І війна, по ньому я бачу, що війна не завжди є лише героїчна. So, I don't know, do you have a question? One more question right now, is this it?
Yeah. No, we actually have a question about movie adaptation of Chaos Walking, and yeah. What was your experience on working with movie industry, and how did it feel, and did you like the result?
My experience on the movie of A Monster Calls was fantastic. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I wrote every word of that movie. I worked closely with the director and the producer and the actors, and I'm so proud of A Monster Calls. Chaos Walking maybe didn't turn out as well as I might have hoped, you know, but that's the movie business. And I have two movies based on my books, and how ridiculously lucky am I for that. I can never ever complain. You know, I come from a very, very small town with from a very poor family, and to sit here and to have two movies made, I can't possibly complain. I enjoyed the experience because I learned, and I think it made me a better writer, and that's what I want to keep doing. I want to keep getting better. It's a challenge. They pay you well for the challenge. So you can't really complain about that either. Yeah, I would wish it for anyone, for any author. I want everybody to have that experience. It's amazing and wonderful and terrible and all those things. And I'd love for everyone to have it.
Отже, досвід із екранізацією книги «Поклик монстра» був крутий. Я був захоплений, я працював дуже тісно із режисером, із продюсером, і написав кожнісіньке слово сценарію, я працював із акторами, і зрештою це був дуже крутий досвід. Із «Ходячим хаосом» ситуація була трішечки інша, але зрештою це є шоу-бізнес, це абсолютно інший абсолютно інститут бізнесу, абсолютно інша ситуація, але тоді я собі подумаю, що, чорт забирай, в мене є 2 фільми, зняті за моїми книгами. Я із маленького міста, із бідної родини, і ось я сиджу перед вами, і за моїми книгами зняли цілих 2 фільми. Це є неймовірний досвід, і досвід, що зробив мене кращим письменником, ніж я був до того. І мені би хотілося, аби всі ми мали досвід такий, аби за нашими книгами зняли фільм. Ми з Іриною Грабовською тихенько плачемо в кутку в цьому моменті, але сподіваємося, що все буде. So with that, I think we've had a very prolific talk, and I feel that personally as a writer and also as an interviewer, I've learned new stuff and new lenses through which to look at a monster chaos and the chaos walking. And I think we've gathered some money. Irina, do you have the total number of money that we've gathered?
Yeah, 13,610.
30,610. Okay.
Yeah, it's in hryvnias, in the local currency.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. This has been so good. This is, I don't know, you're just...
Thank you. Yeah.
That you guys are still doing this with smiles on your faces is a miracle. And I'm just so impressed, and I'm so moved, and I cannot wish you more the best.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Well, really hoping that one day when there is peace, we'll be able to see you and introduce you to your fan base in person, signing the books, everything. And I do believe that now, I don't know, maybe in the past they were saying that with certainty, but now I feel like yeah, we're getting to it as soon as the piece starts. And I'm thank you for finding the time to talk with us. And you're awesome. We'll be really waiting for your next books.
Thank you very much. What a great experience. Thank you so much. I cannot wait to visit you in peacetime soon.
Thank you.
Soon.
Любі друзі, ми зібрали 13 610 гривень. Квитанцію про передачу всіх цих грошей госпітальєрам ви знайдете у наших соцмережах одразу після завершення цієї розмови. Разом з тим ми страшенно вдячні пану Патріку, дякуємо за його книги, за те, що знайшов час з ними поспілкуватися. Ми вже запросили його на наш фестиваль, якого ще не існує, але тільки буде мир і буде радість і електроенергія. Ми зразу зробимо цілий фестиваль. Бо, чого вже та гріха таїти, та хочеться. Тому дякую вам всім за увагу, гарного дня, до побачення. Thank you. See ya.
Thank you so much. Thanks very much.
Bye.